Let's look at another example of remixing light passes to create the finished result. This render is a lot older. It predates global illumination times when everything had to be done essentially using direct illumination and shadows. Ambient occlusion was still a relatively new thing at the time, so it was considered a valid workflow. I would say at this point in history, you wouldn't likely be using ambient occlusion in this manner, except for very specific cases. So please do not replicate this workflow unless you know exactly what you're doing and you know why you're using ambient occlusion, because most of the time nowadays it's deprecated. So what we have here is several direct illumination lighting passes. We have a key light, a fake bounce light, which is meant to model the indirect illumination from the ground, a rim light, and a second rim light. We also have an ambient pass, which combines with an ambient occlusion pass to create a sort of poor man's ambient illumination, and some direct illumination passes for the ground. We have the fill, or the ambient of the environment, onto the ground, and just composited in the sky very quickly here. And then we also have the key light pass, which has the shadows baked into the pass. We have an ambient occlusion or exposure pass, which is meant to replicate the shadow of the sky to the ground. So it's like the soft shadow that the skylight or the ambient light would cast to the ground. So how do we bring these all together? Well, if you remember, the first thing we need to do is we need to unpremultiply images if we're going to manipulate their RGB channels independently of their alpha channels. So if we look at this image and we toggle back and forth between the alpha channel, we can see in this case that this image is actually still in a premultiplied state. It appears that all of these are still in a premultiplied state, which means our first order of business is we need to unpremultiply them. So I'm dropping down and unpremultiply on each one of these light passes. Let's look at this exposure pass. It looks as if it is already unpremultiplied because that is how the renderer made it. To knock the ambient occlusion off of the ambient pass, or the full ambient lit pass, I'm going to use a multiply merge. So multiply, merge. Multiply A times B. And so this has the effect of removing the light where the ambient occlusion was the strongest. Ambient occlusion is essentially what it does is it shoots rays out from the surface to see what the first hit is, and it returns the result. So all the ones that it's shooting down, all the rays that it's shooting down, it's finding more hits to the ground, so hence it's creating a darker shadowing effect. The same for inside the mouth and inside the nose and the eyes here. So it's in the ear as well. So it's finding a lot of occlusion, so hence it's creating a darker effect, and all the muscles and stuff are popping out because they're finding occlusions with the iguanodon itself. So we have our sort of general ambient pass. Let's bring our key light together with it. We're just going to add those together using a plus. The logic I like to use is the light that I'm adding, I put on the A pipe, so if I'd like to fade it out, I can use the mix slider to adjust how much I'm putting on. So copy that, A plus B. I'm just duplicating the plus node, or you can, since it's still going to be the thing in the top list, if I hit tab, it will be the first thing to drop down. A plus B, tab plus A plus B, plus A plus B. So let's see what we got here. Now, one of the things that might be a bit of a surprise is because these merge operations, all the matless merge operations, do all their operations pixel-wise. All these channels, or I should say channel-wise, all of these channels are adding together, including the alpha. So if we look at the alpha channel down here, look at the color picker, you'll see that the alpha channel has now added up to be a value of 5 here in the core, because we've added 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 AOVs together, and we have this huge alpha. And worse yet, it's not just that the core has added up to be 5. If we look at one of the original pristine alphas and we look at where they've all added up, so I've attached viewer 1 here, and I'm attaching viewer 2, input 2 here, and I toggle back and forth. All of the in-between pixels have added up as well. So all of my anti-aliasing, everything has become invalid. So even if I were to say try to clamp this alpha channel in an attempt to salvage it, let's say, it would still wouldn't be very useful. But that doesn't matter. We can always copy a pristine alpha channel from one of these inputs. So I'm just going to copy the one that's closest here. Another workflow would be that we don't add the alpha channels together as we go through, but I prefer this second workflow because it's much less ambiguous. So what I'm going to do is copy a pristine alpha channel from this input here. I'm holding down the control key to get a dot. And I can also get another dot by hitting period. So I'm copying the A alpha channel from this input all the way down into here. So you'll see. Now I'm getting a nice clean pristine alpha channel. This is on 1, this is on 2. I'm getting a perfect alpha channel down here. And I can pre-multiply it here if I like. And I get a nice result. Now let's start prepping the background because we won't really know what we need to do to adjust this till we put it over the background. This merge over is simply copying the sky into this, so we don't have to worry about anything there. This is the ambient pass, or the environment pass. So if I wanted to darken the ground to be like the contact shadows of this critter's feet, I could use a grade node here, and I'm going to use the mask input to control where it copies. Now, it's giving me an error because it's by default the mask is looking for the alpha channel, and if we look at this, we'll see it has no alpha channel. I'm hitting A. So let's pick another channel. We'll just pick red, which is the first channel, see if that makes it happy. Yep, it does. So I will then multiply that. Okay, that's not what I want. Let's invert. There we go. So this exposure was maybe not in the, let's call it polarity that I wanted. It was negative compared to what I needed from a mask, but I can invert it in my grade node in the mask input here. So there, I've knocked out the little contact shadows for his feet. This is meant to be my key light pass for my ground. So let me just do the exact same logic I used here. I'll do a merge plus to bring those two together. So I'm adding the key light on to my ambient light or my environment light. And I don't know if this is right. Maybe it's right. The sky seems pretty bright. Maybe the amount of sky that I have is too strong. If I wanted to, I could grade that here to darken the amount of sky so it's maybe not quite such a bright sky light filling the ground. That might be a little bit more realistic. And you'll notice that my shadows are seeming to take on an almost a greenish color. So maybe they are too bluish. We can adjust this all in a second once we bring everything together. We'll start dialing everything. This is already pre-multiplied, so all I need to do now is do a merge over the background, and I have my dinosaur over my ground. Now, it does not look that amazing. I think, what's the first problem I see is that he seems to be floating above the ground. He's not positioned right, so maybe we can transform him a little bit so that he feels like he's actually touching his shadows. And this is a possibility here. That's a little bit better. I think he's lifting this foot up, so maybe that's not as big a problem. And what else? It seems like his bounce light is obviously the wrong color and definitely possibly too bright, so we can remix his bounce light. Now remember, it's all unpremultiplied here, so I can do grades without worrying about the premultiplication state because it's already in an unpremultiplied state. So let's take some of that out of there, some of that bounce. Maybe we can adjust the color of it. I'm holding down Control while I click to get the big color mixer. So if I want to go the opposite direction from what this color is, I just move this color picker that direction. So if I want to cancel out that orange color, I can go exactly the opposite direction of that orange color and multiply it by the opposite color to make it less of that color. It seems like the ground might have a bit more of a brownish feel in it, so if I move more towards red, that'll give me more of a brownish feeling. And if I want to desaturate it, I can go this way. Now, one of the problems with remixing the color of lights using this technique is that, especially on a very saturated character like this, what we're essentially doing is we're tinting the color of the character when we tint its light AOV like this. We're not simulating the response of a saturated light hitting a saturated thing. So in the case of, let's say, a red thing being hit by a blue light, it won't reflect blue light because it's itself red. So this technique has its limitations, and you have to be careful because you can create just as artificial looking results by doing that as you can by going with what the renderer gives you, because what the renderer will give you will typically be a slightly more physically correct response, and especially in the new physically based renderers, it will definitely give you a more physical response. His shin might be still a little bit too bright, but let's just knock a little bit more of this out overall. If you wanted to, you could desaturate this altogether and just take the value of that light instead. It's starting to look a little less fake. And there you go. Let's bring in a little bit less of the environment lighting on our critter as well. So after the pre-mult here, I could do a grade, and I can use this to multiply how much of that environment light I put on him, or I'm going to disable that by hitting D. I could do it after I've done the whole pre-multiplication. It wouldn't matter in this case because these are both whether or not I do remove the ambient after I do the ambient occlusion or not, it's going to give the same result. So we'll just do it here. A little bit of that ambient light off, ambient occlusion light off, and it's starting to look a little bit more solid. Maybe kill a little bit of this, more of this ambient skylight. There we go. So that's how you can remix lighting using light AOVs. The real secret sauce of the whole thing is making sure that you're always working in that unpremultiplied state when you're remixing the lights, and that you keep track of your premultiplication state properly for when you do your final composite. And this can save you a lot of time, especially in renderers that can output light AOVs directly. There are a few that can do this with nothing more than just flipping a switch, so it doesn't cost you anything more in terms of render time, and yet you can get this independent control of your AOVs after the fact. Another thing I guess worth mentioning is that if you've already got a completed result out of the renderer, oftentimes it will make a beauty pass even when it is generating all these light AOVs. What you can do is you can actually subtract the one AOV that you want to modify. So let's say that I was getting this out of my renderer. I had a global illumination renderer that could give me a nice result like this. I could unpremultiply it and then subtract the one light AOV that I need to drop down a merge and do a difference. Subtract the AOV that you want to remove. So in this case, I removed the key light by subtracting it. and then add back in the amount of key light that you want back in. So this is a way that you can, even when you're getting something and you don't want to have to deal with building it all the way back up from all of the original light AOVs, you can do it on a case-by-case basis, on a AOV by AOV basis. And it's a totally valid workflow. You just have to be very cautious when you do these subtracts that you don't subtract more than was there to begin with, because that will create a bad result. Let's say that this had much more magnitude, you'll see. Very bad. But when it is exactly the same amount that you've pulled out that was in there to begin with, obviously it's mathematically reversible, so you don't have to worry about that, and then you can add back in the amount that you want. So there's a couple different strategies you can think about. Just wanted to expose you to an alternate workflow here. There's no homework related to this, but these files are available if you want to play around with them.